Okay, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Unbridled Medicine TV. I was inspired to do the latest episode talking about our false expectations, and I was sort of triggered by this in something I'm navigating through right now in my business. And this is a very common exercise that I go through. And I think that this is also something that triggers often our abandonment of our path or our fear of pursuing something because it didn't go the way that we thought before. So false expectation to me is when we have a vision that we've created, a dream, and this expectation of how we think that it's going to unfold. And then when it doesn't happen, usually there's a fallout or despair or discouragement that we feel in relationship to that, that then sort of alters or inhibits us moving forward or continuing to create. So I wanted to give some examples of that because it's something that, first of all, is very common. I think most of us that have been, building towards something, either a business or a dream or a big vision, we know that we can expect that it's probably not going to look that the way that we wanted to. And I wanted to share my journey about that today. So my first experience with this idea of false expectation was in college, actually. So I, for a long portion of my life, since I was 13 years old, had this dream that I was going to become a horse breeder. And I had this crazy obsession with horses. I felt like horses were part of my purpose. And I got introduced to an Arabian horse breeding farm at 13 with my mother that then sparked this idea and vision of going to this school in Alberta, Canada, which was the only school in Canada that taught breeding. And then at that point, I was really obsessed with race horses. And so that I was going to go to Kentucky and work my way up at a breeding farm and all of this stuff. So that was my vision. That was my dream. And I got into this college. And I think that the first sort of failure, I remember this, was I didn't get in right away. I actually got in on a waiting list. So they only accepted 10 people in the program. So I remember feeling devastated, first of all, that basically my whole energy and focus was to get into the school. I didn't have a backup plan. And when I didn't get into it right away, it was crushing. So I had this expectation that, things were going to move fluid and I was going to get in. I did eventually get in, but it was through a waiting list. So that was sort of my first sort of experience of things not kind of going to plan. And then I remember going to my internship in college, and I originally thought I was going to go to Kentucky. I chose New York State because it was closer to home. And my first day on my internship, basically my whole dream of being a horse breeder imploded in my face, and it was devastating. The industry wasn't what I thought it was. I didn't like being in the States. I didn't like being in the environment with racehorses. And it was incredibly depressing to have a dream and a focus for so long just basically shatter in your face. Now, it's led me to where I am today in the work that I've done with my horses. But at that point, I didn't really know, where that was going. And so I think the thing that was so devastating for me in those moments was that erosion of that I had an expectation of how things were going to go. I didn't really trust. I had a huge attachment to how things were going to unfold. And those experiences, and why I'm sharing those, because they kind of created a wounding for me that at any time where I was facing this idea of going for a vision, I held back because I was so afraid of being devastated or going through that experience of failure again. So fast forward, and I get to a place where I'm in a position to lease a property. And this was my first entry into following a vision of having my own farm and developing my programs with horses. And I do all of that, and it's really hard. I think that I had this vision that, okay, I'm going to be able to manifest everything, and it's going to be very easy, and things are just going to flow. And I wasn't really expecting to have as many roadblocks and challenges as I did in terms of, being afraid of being seen, or, financially, I went into a lot of debt. And I just, that wasn't part of the vision. When we plan this vision or have this idea of how things are going to go, we don't really plan on like debt and failure and stuff. So I think that I know as part of my nature, which is a really good thing in terms of I can be somewhat fantastical and believe in the possibility of things. And then the flip side of that is I get really attached to that really big vision and fantastical vision that when it doesn't come true, I feel betrayed, and I feel like, betrayed by the universe, betrayed by myself. And I really beat myself up about it. And so I think part of where I wanted to really speak and dismantle this is to really talk about how do we move forward with a vision that's grounded in a sense of expectation that's not rooted in sort of fantasy, so that we know that we're going to, bump up against things and it's going to be hard, but it doesn't, when that stuff happens, it doesn't sort of root us into betrayal or failure or despair so much so that we give up. And I think what I often will witness, and I know I've had these times in my journey too, where I don't feel like I have the capacity to go through moving through that much of devastation again, that it really makes me, for lack of a better term, kind of gun shy from continuing to build. Or what I also see is we can kind of give up a bit too soon because things don't match our expectation. And I see this with clients as well when I'm working with them and we're starting out and they realize that this is a little bit harder than I anticipated. And, I've had clients that have left their corporate jobs to pursue their purpose. And then they have, again, this expectation of I'm following my purpose and I'm following my bliss. And so 6 months from now, everything's going to be booming. And it doesn't happen that way. And so there's this really big space of deflation that happens in terms of feeling emotionally deflated and in despair. So what do we do with that? And what do we, how do we navigate that? So the last sort of experience I want to share in relationship to that was, I keep coming up against this over and over again. This is basically what I'm trying to say. I have had to still learn my way through what it means to hold expectation that's rooted in wisdom and expectation that's rooted in expectation, if that makes sense. So I finally, with my business after 3 years, got to a place where I was booming and I made 6 figures. And I found myself in a place where at 32 years old, which was not what I expected to be at, I was in a position to buy my dream property, which was a 1.2 million property, which I'm speaking to you from today. And my first year, I hired this really, I invested a lot of money in a branding company and created this really big vision for my first year of making $500,000. And again, I was unprepared for the reality of buying a retreat center and adding a different branch to my business and having staff and managing people. And so quickly, I realized I wasn't even going to come close to my lofty goals for that year. And so again, there sort of was this pattern of I feel betrayed. I was really mad at the universe. Like, how could you put me in this beautiful place only to have me fail? I had sort of these meltdowns because, again, the reality of my vision didn't match my expectation. And that was a really hard pill for me to swallow. And one of the things that I learned in that journey, kind of going through that year, and for me, it was like there was a lot of bruising of my ego that year in terms of I had this idea that I just had this amazing year in my business and that would carry through and things were going to be magical. And I didn't expect to face the things that I expected in my first year at the ranch and how hard it was. And I think the other piece and the other layer to this is the experience and the learning curves that we're going to be presented with when we pursue something. And that was something that I kind of failed to ignore, to appreciate was going to be part of the process. And so where I've gleaned some wisdom or experience from that is now when I have and hold a big vision, which I still do, I think our visions for our business and our lives are constantly evolving. Instead of being shy and holding back because I don't want to face disappointment, I still let myself dream with this understanding that the unfolding of that vision and the success is probably not going to look the way I think it is. And I'm not going to have expectations of myself and of the journey to be something before I really go into it, in terms of I'm going to actually anticipate that things are going to be a bit challenging and I'm going to face things. And there's probably going to be a learning curve if it's something new and I'm growing. And I think anytime we're expanding or going into a big vision, there is going to be a process of growth. And so my expectations are now rooted in this. I expect that I'm going to succeed. how long it takes me to succeed and what it looks like to get to that success, I appreciate that it's probably not going to look the way that maybe I think it is. But I hold and root down into that expectation of I expect to succeed. And that way, I'm almost prepared to, and I know that when I'm facing that journey of building something of substance, our big visions or, the big goals we have for our business, I'm still holding that belief and confidence of expecting myself to triumph in that. And I think that my triumph in success is also not based on how much money I necessarily make or what the physical things look like, but more so in what is my internal experience, and how do I measure that expectancy of success. So for me, for example, now my success is rooted in this, that I'm able to stay grounded in my purpose and have the courage and the confidence to continue to show up and share my gifts, and that I'm holding space for the magnitude and possibility of my visions to take root into my life, and that I have compassion and support for myself as I move through that journey. So my expectancy is not rooted in or attached to how much money I'm going to make or when that's going to happen. And that's the falsehood expectancy that's rooted in ego. And so when we don't see something that's measured or aligned to how we think it's going to go, that's what often creates the disappointment and the despair and the discouragement. So one of the things that I will share with my clients in a process that I do for myself, when I notice those emotions coming up, right, where I feel like, oh my God, I feel so discouraged, I feel ashamed that it's taking me longer than what I thought, is to take a breath, first of all, and send compassion and forgiveness for myself for the things that I need to learn along the way. And to know that I can absolutely have an expectation that there is going to be a learning curve, which is something that I never really give myself space for. And I remind myself of, I still hold that expectation of success, but my success means something different than it did, 3 years ago, 2 years ago. And then I breathe and give myself a lot of space and curiosity around what am I learning here? So instead of seeing something because it doesn't matches my vision of it, that it's a failure, instead it becomes an invitation of curiosity. And so when we don't have false expectations, we have a lot more room to be present to how our journey is going to navigate. And we don't get so attached to the end result that we get to and how it looks like, and that's a measure of success or not. And why I'm sort of saying that is because I know, again, from my own experience, the things that will sometimes stop me in my tracks from continuing to build for my vision or to continue to grow and sustain. Like it does take quite the dedication and the commitment to build something of substance, holding a 6-figure business or a profitable business, which I think is actually a more accurate statement, is something that requires nurturing and energy to output. And there's going to be days where everything feels like it's rolling, and there's going to be days where it feels like you're failing. And I think that when we sort of are attaching ourselves to that expectancy of what we think it's going to be and how that journey is going to look like, it can be very difficult for us to continue to stay the course, because we get sort of tangled in that place of disappointment or failure, or I'm hurt and I can't trust myself and I can't trust the universe, so I'm not going to continue further, and we abandon our path. So I think one of the places of abandonment of our path and building comes from this place of this attachment to this false expectancy of how we think it's going to go. And so sometimes I have to have this real grounded, kind of come to Jesus moment with my clients. And I can remember one woman in particular who I was mentoring, and she had left her corporate job and had this big vision. I'm going to start my coaching practice with horses, and I'm so passionate about it. And then I remember having a conversation with her like 3 or 4 months in, where she was like, I don't understand what's happening. Like, it's taking longer. And the despair and the frustration started to kick in. And one of the things that I said to her, I said, listen, things don't get built in a day. And sometimes our path to building things looks like stuff isn't happening right away, and we have to stay the course. She was ready to go back to her old job, or to pack it in. And it's not to say that we don't listen to our wisdom sometimes when something doesn't feel right, but I actually think that more often or not, we're abandoning our path before we actually see it through, because we're experiencing these emotions of disappointment, discouragement, failure, and we don't know how to overcome them. And so I'm sharing this because I know my first year on the ranch was probably one of the hardest in most recent history, and that was about 3.5 years ago, where I was ready to quit. And that was probably the most I'd threatened to quit on my business and on myself than I had in a while, because I just couldn't be with the fact that this idea and this kind of fantasy I had about this achievement of success I was going to have my first year was just not coming true. And I felt so much shame and so much internal failure, and again betrayal, like the universe is putting me through things and it's not supposed to do this, that almost was what drove me to pack it in. Now thankfully I kind of wised up a little bit, and I remember having this moment where I kind of was having a meltdown and complaining to my guides, and my spiritual helpers, and they almost showed me like a starting point in a race, and I was 2 steps out, and I realized that I'm kind of having a meltdown for no reason. And I also knew that in order for me to continue this path, the thing that needs to shift in me is how I'm feeling about where I am. And that is one of the challenges for somebody like myself who is a visionary, and I do have big dreams, and I am a dreamer. That can be kind of the thing that hooks me the most, and kind of creates this self-deprecating space when it doesn't align to my reality. And then it triggers this idea of, I live in fantasy land, none of my visions are ever going to come true, which is sort of silly, considering what I've created in my life, right? But it is one of the things that can be challenging for us when we're building anything. And so my wisdom that I wanted to share is, first of all, it's normal. And what we want to shift when this is happening. So if you feel like I'm disappointed or discouraged because something that's happened in my life or building my business didn't go the way that I wanted it to go, and I had this expectation, and maybe you say, well, I didn't really have expectation, but we do, when we have a dream and we're wanting it to thrive and succeed, we do have expectation. And if it doesn't go my way, then I feel this way. And so, and just noticing that, and you can be with the wounding of that, like what's the wound that's in there. And for me, a lot of it was rooted in this place of this expectation of how I thought that I was meant to show up in the world. And also that if it didn't match this fantasy I had, other people would also feel disappointed in me. So that was really, it's an attachment of ego. And so what supported me in moving through that is really sitting with, what's the true expectation that comes from a place of wisdom and soul. And so for me, again, it's really important to hold, I expect myself to succeed, because if I have this idea of I'm going to fail or this is never going to work, I'm probably not going to have the confidence to continue the path. So I internalize this belief system of I expect my success. But then I redefine what success is, and I don't put an attachment of the picture of how I think that's going to manifest. And I land it in sort of a deeper place of growth in the journey and purpose. So it's less kind of superficial and more meaningful. And then I sort of move forward knowing I expect myself to succeed. And I know, and I'm grounded in that the journey is going to have me face some diversity and probably some challenges. And it might not unfold the way that I think it's going to be, but that's okay, because I trust in the end, I'm going to get to where, the dream that I'm nurturing is to go. And I remember when I was in sort of that open space, this is really where this property manifested, because I didn't have this idea, like I didn't think I'd be ready for this till I was 40, to be transparent. And so it was sort of this shock, because I was sort of in that openness of not defining or holding this vision of how I think it was supposed to be. And I kind of gave myself some slack and a break around that. When I had that sort of openness where it wasn't attached to how the journey was going to go or what was going to happen or how long it would take, there was more permission, and I wasn't so down on myself. And so if you find your place where this is resonating, take some time to, first of all, have some compassion and forgiveness and permission and space to learn and to grow. And then to hold this, what is the real expectation that's rooted in my soul that I feel that I want to nurture right now? Where is it coming from ego, and where can I let go of that? So often, where we attach our success is based on our performance, or again, it's sort of in this ego place of what we need to feel worthy or appreciated, or to know that we have confidence because of. For me, a lot of it was based on, I want people to see me a certain way, and I held ideas for myself of how I think it was supposed to look. If I'm the spiritual person that is very capable and courageous, I shouldn't have to struggle. So that was the expectation around the ego. What was really supportive for me was, again, to kind of realign that my expectation is rooted, again, and I know that I'm going to succeed, and my success comes from a deeper place, with full permission that I'm going to let go and to trust that the journey to get there is going to be what it is. And it's more about what I grow and what I learn along the journey, and how it manifests and appears in the external spaces. So this includes your business. So if you're finding that it's taking longer to grow something, or something didn't go the way that you thought it would, or it's taking you longer to reach 6 figures or to fill your spaces, take a breath. Know that it's normal. Failure is part of it. Get curious as to what new alignment is being initiated or invited in you, and what's the new vision of success that feels more rooted in a place of soul and permission, and then create from there. So that's what I wanted to share on this episode. Let me know how that resonates for you. If it's sort of supported, where, take a breath that, yes, I was feeling discouraged. I will tell you that despair, discouragement, and this idea of we're failing is going to keep you from moving forward and progressing, more so than what you're looking at on the outside, if that makes sense. So if we can shift how we are relating to how our path is looking, it's going to allow us to continue the momentum forward, and then we can stay the course and be devoted and persistent to the path, and then we'll see our success blossom in ways that we didn't expect it to be. So that's your encouragement for today's episode. Let me know how that lands and resonates. And as a side, if you kind of like the things that we're sharing on our YouTube channel, please feel free to follow us on Facebook, Hillary Schneider, or Women Who Run with Horses, or you can look our website, hillaryschneider.com. We have lots of different calls that we've done over the past that you can find also on our website, that kind of goes deeper into how do we build our path to success in a way that feels authentic and intuitive, and allows us to really support, I think, the full potential of what it is that we're seeking to create in our lifetime. So thank you for joining me. Feel free to follow me if you like this, and we'll see you on the next episode.